In this video, we're talking about food guilt and what to do if you struggle with feeling guilty after eating. My name is Carrie. I'm an eating psychology coach, and today I'm going to share 3 tips to stop feeling guilty after you eat. And before we dive into those tips, I really want to validate how normal it is to struggle with food guilt. Did you know that there are almost 1,000 people a month searching this online? How to stop feeling guilty after eating. And that's just people searching for answers, right? So that doesn't even account for how many people are struggling with it and just feeling helpless or feeling resigned to it. So if you struggle with feeling guilty after eating, I want you to know that you're not alone. It's a very normal response to today's culture, which is obsessed with dieting and thinness. Food rules are part of popular culture, like books like Eat This, Not That. And there's so much stigma associated with eating salads. You're seen as virtuous and almost morally superior for eating a salad over chicken tenders when you're out in public. And the same on the other end. It's really common to feel like you're doing something wrong, that you're bad, that you're morally inferior for choosing to eat a cookie when you're in public. And feelings of guilt don't just apply to when you're in public. They definitely can permeate your existence when you're in private. It's very possible to struggle with binge eating or night eating and then feel really guilty after doing so because we beat ourselves up. So many people in my practice as an eating psychology coach, so many of my clients, all of my clients are really nice people. And they're so nice to everyone around them, but they're really hard on themselves. Do you relate to that? Do you relate to being able to extend kindness and compassion to other people, but you struggle to show it to yourself? And this is one of the patterns around feeling guilty around food. This almost sense of I don't feel worthy of my own approval because I'm not living up to society's expectations of what I should be eating. And before I dig into those 3 tips on how to stop feeling guilty after eating, I just want to again validate that feeling guilty after eating is a normal and valid response to suffering. If you're stressed, you're more likely to feel guilty after eating. If you're dieting, you're definitely more likely to feel guilty after eating. Because when we diet, when we impose food rules upon ourselves, not even talking about the societal expectations around eating, virtuous eating, guilty eating, but when we impose food rules onto ourselves, it's very normal to feel guilty after eating because no one has ironclad willpower, especially if you're not eating enough. And so if you're dieting, you're not eating enough, and your body is releasing hormones to motivate you to eat because your body is wired to survive, and then you end up breaking the food rules and feeling really guilty when really nobody can outsmart or outrun their biology. So I just wanted to start this video by saying that it is very normal and very valid to struggle with feeling guilty after eating, and there are steps you can take to stop feeling guilty after eating. So I'm going to break it down into 3 steps. The first step is, of course, to stop dieting, give up the food rules, and embrace intuitive eating. Now, this would seem like straightforward advice, but when I was doing research, because I'm a nerd and I like to look at clinical studies, I was very intrigued that I found a clinical study where people who ate intuitively improved in all these other markers: better body satisfaction, better psychological health, even better eating habits. They did not feel less guilty around food. And I found that really interesting. And I want to talk about it because I think it is a very real concept that it takes time to unravel the food rules. So people who are bravely stepping into the world of intuitive eating and who are very bravely giving up dieting, it's a very groundless, out of control feeling to let go of the food rules, and that fear and anxiety is real. To me, it's not that surprising that people that are embarking on intuitive eating still feel guilty around food, because it takes time to let go of all the stigma around food, and it takes time to redevelop trust in yourself and your body. Dieting erodes self-trust. Dieting teaches you that you cannot trust yourself. But when we eat according to our body's signals, eat exactly what appeals to you when you're hungry, stop when you're full, and do the stop, drop, and feel when you want to eat without hunger. Those are the Psycho-Spiritual Wellness Eating Guidelines. I will link them below. When we do those tips, they will help us reach our natural weight. They will help us stop compulsive eating in the long run, but they might not immediately make us feel good or erode the food guilt at first. So if you're new to intuitive eating, if you haven't yet given up dieting, be really patient with yourself. It takes time for the food guilt to go away. Trust that you are following a very well-trodden path when you choose to give up dieting and eat intuitively instead. And the benefits of intuitive eating are enormous. Okay, so it's very well worth dealing with the initial anxiety, the fear of weight gain. I'll link to my video on that down below. The fear of weight gain with intuitive eating is very real because it's very scary to let go of the food rules. So if you're watching this video because you struggle with feeling guilty after eating, and you also feel very afraid to let go of the food rules, and you feel afraid to let yourself have quote unquote bad foods, I want you to know that you are normal, and that these anxiety and fears are not only normal, but these are the emotions that we need to practice the stop, drop, and feel with. These are the emotions that we want to learn how to hold space for, because otherwise they tend to drive compulsive eating. Now, without diving too much into the mechanics of the stop, drop, and feel and the eating guidelines, I'll link to plenty of resources down below in the description. Let's move on to the second tip for learning how to not feel guilty after eating, and that is mindful eating. Mindful eating has been shown to be significantly associated with less guilt after eating. And all these studies that I'm referencing, by the way, I have linked to in my blog article on how to stop feeling guilty after eating, and that is also linked down below as well. Mindful eating is no doubt helpful for healing our relationship with food. When we pay attention to the food that we eat, we have a better chance at recognizing when we're full. We tend to enjoy our food more. And there are a lot of known benefits to mindful eating. Now, there's a caveat to almost all these tips that I'm sharing, because unraveling the food shtick is loaded, it's complex, it's intricate, and I do have my own criticism, if you will, of mindful eating. And it is that mindful eating is great in theory, it's great in practice when you can practice it. Those of us that struggle with compulsive eating, myself included, I can speak directly from personal experience on this one. It can be very frustrating to not be able to eat mindfully because you're in the grips of compulsion. So even if you know that you want to eat without distraction, you know that you want to sit down and enjoy your food without Netflix, but sometimes it's compulsive. And as much as we want to eat mindfully, it's not always accessible. And so I mention mindful eating as an antidote to the food guilt because clinical studies have shown that it helps. However, if you're someone like me who, while you're unraveling the food shtick, if you can't get yourself to eat mindfully, I do not want that to compound and add to the self-criticism that already exists. Those of us that struggle with compulsive eating, those of us that struggle around food are so hard on ourselves, and we do not need to add one more reason for the inner critic to grab the mic and beat us up. So if you have the space for mindful eating, if you're having a good day and you have the space to eat mindfully, do it. It will help you feel less guilty when you eat. But if there are days where you feel you're stressed, your emotional tolerance is spent, you feel kind of in the grips of compulsion, do not beat yourself up for not being able to do mindful eating. What I would recommend on those days is to just set your timer, do the stop, drop, and feel for just 2 minutes, and then you're off the hook. Just 2 minutes of holding space for edginess and holding space for discomfort really is enough to develop tolerance for uncomfortable emotions. And when we develop emotional tolerance, compulsive eating naturally starts to diminish over time. And the third tip for learning how to not feel guilty after eating is to do what I like to call thought swaps. So compulsive eaters, people that struggle with feeling guilty after eating, chronic dieters, yo-yo dieters, all of us are again really good at criticizing ourselves. Our inner critic is strong. It's constantly grabbing the mic and taking up all that airtime in our heads, filling us with self-judgment and all these horrible thoughts. Now, we can't just let go of patterns like that overnight because our brains like to do things that they frequently do. So the more we criticize ourselves, the more our brains get practice at criticizing us. And so our brains get kind of good at it, and then we do it on autopilot. So instead of, again, getting frustrated that we can't stop the self-criticism because it's probably an ingrained habit for many of us, what I like to encourage you to do is do a thought swap. So anytime you catch yourself saying something self-critical, like, oh my gosh, I'm so gross for eating that, I want you to notice it. And then instead of trying to push that thought away and resist it, which only heightens the frustration that we feel, instead of trying to shove those thoughts down and away, I want you to just tack on another thought that is rooted in self-compassion to the end. Like, oh, of course I just ate what I just ate because I haven't eaten all day, and this is a normal response to extreme hunger. Whatever you can do to grab onto an ounce of self-compassion and just mindfully think that thought to yourself and try and just hold space for it for just a second. And over time, I guarantee you that you will naturally become more compassionate towards yourself because our brains are very plastic, they're very adaptive, and the brain likes to do what it frequently does. And so the more you practice self-compassionate thoughts, the more compassionate you will truly be towards yourself. And then my hope is that as your self-compassion grows, your courage to give up dieting and trust your body to inform what and when you eat will increase because it takes a lot of courage to give up dieting. It is not easy. There's so much that goes into it, and that's what I hope all my free videos help you with. If you want to learn more, I do talk about virtuous eating in my online course, Food Normal. I will link that down below. I would love to hear your thoughts if you struggle with feeling guilty after eating. So if you can leave me a comment on this video and let others know that they are not alone if they're struggling with this, because so many of us are. And it is a valid struggle. It is a normal struggle. And I hope that with time and practice and self-compassion, you can help override those patterns and feel normal around food and kick the food guilt. Again, my name is Carrie, and I will see you in the next one.